So the one thing I'm not going to be going through, there's two things I'm not going to be going through. You need to make a static IP address or the IP address that nDisplay is trying to run will constantly. It's super easy. You can look it up. I kind of flubbed it the first 2 or 3 times I tried to do it. Just, you'll be able to figure it out. And the second thing that I'm not going to help you with is setting up the Vive system. You are on your own on that one. And of course, installing Unreal Engine. All right, so I'm just gonna go off of this stuff. So when you download it, you are going to have a config file named Versa VP Toolkit config. You wanna open that, and what I recommend to do is to I just pin most of the things that I'm using here to the taskbar so that you can get to them super quick at any time. And you'll see, you know what I mean? When I do a startup, I just run down this line and go bing, 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 bing. And then everything just fires up and then you're almost ready to roll. So first, let's do a room setup. I'm only going to go through the room setup because I have a certain way that I do it, and I can't guarantee that this is going to work if you don't do it the same way that I do. So when you hold the trigger, I kind of like to try and think of my whole entire set and say, what do I want to be front? What do I want to be back? Where's the center of my screen? All that. And that's where you're really standing near where your root is going to be created, which is like the foundation of where your meshes are related to. And, you know, it's as I explained it before, it's the tree of, it's the roots of VR tree. And so I think where you're close to where you're standing is where it generates, but it definitely will generate your X axis, your front, your forward and backwards. So I'll just hold I like to put it towards this screen because that's just how I have my system set up. It kind of sucks because when I have my projector running, I move the thing to the side and it goes forward because my actual forward is here. But wherever you want your forward to be, which is usually the center of whatever main screen you'll be using. And then you calibrate your floor. This is all simple stuff. Make sure you're not in the way of your base stations when you calibrate your floor. I've realized that can result in it being pretty off. Right here, I like to use the advanced settings, the advanced mode, because then you can just click the corners of kind of your area. I like to make this semi-accurate, you know, because then if you ever see it or you're thinking about it and how it's set up, it's just a lot easier to have it actually be the shape of your room. So that is the exact shape of my room. And then so here, I go against what they say, and I turn this to be perfectly straight to whatever wall. So if your LED wall was right here, I would point it straight at the center of your LED wall. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that's how I can, like, I know it's going to work, and that's just what I found to be my favorite way of working with this. And then you hit next, and you are all set up. So what we're going to do is you're going to go into the file that you downloaded, and we are looking for Blue's Clues. You're going to open up the virtual production toolkit and then fire that. Open. I'm actually tempted to reinstall this. So once you get in here, we're going to do some other things before we actually get into like making sure everything is set up properly. we are going to, let's do the config file so that when we are finished doing that, it'll be done. So the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna put your IP, your now static IP address into here. You're gonna put it in the right there. And then for this demo, I'm gonna just run, oops. I'm just gonna run one screen. I'm gonna show you how to set up one screen. And then, so what I'm doing is I'm making these extra pieces void, or it will try and fire them and it will crash your system. I haven't had any issues with this. I'm hoping that it's not actually bogging me down, but I'm just too lazy to, every time I'm switching this up, to change that. So I would recommend probably only using the ones that you plan to use. But I'm constantly testing different things, so I'm like flipping through them and changing them all around. So once you've entered in your IP address here and you've decided how many times you want to fire up nDisplay, you have to go down here to your window. So the amount of windows that you have, for me, is what determines how many times I want to fire up nDisplay. I haven't had any luck firing multiple windows in one node. And I don't know if it's possible, but it doesn't work for me. So I have to do a node every time I do a window. So in your window, you're gonna wanna make sure that your ID is correct with whatever node that you're using. And then you're gonna make sure that the VP ID is correct with whatever viewport ID you want to use. So for instance, with this template, this makes it easy. And then whatever window you want to use in relation to the top left corner of your first screen. If you want it to be your first screen, this will be at 0. If you want it to be 2 1080 screens away, you have to add 1080 plus 1080 and then put that there, and it will start at whatever the space is directly after your second screen. And then the same thing for height. Like I said, sometimes LED processor mosaics will need this number. And then this is the resolution of your screen. So find out whatever resolution your screen is. If you may want to always, I like to double check your settings in display and check, see I have 200, which is basically cutting this in half, cutting what it's putting out in half. So you have to keep that in mind, because then when you're doing your second screen, which is my viewport 2, now this is my second fire of nDisplay and my second window, and now my second viewport, I have to make sure that that window starts at the beginning of the next screen, and that's going to be determined by whatever Windows thinks it is. So now you have the resolution that you're entering, which is 200 times, or I mean half of, yeah, it's 200 times, but it's half of the actual resolution. But then to move to the next window, you have to move the entire resolution. This has been fucking me up. And if you try to do a window onto a space that doesn't exist on actual desktop space, it just crashes. Unless you're dealing with an LED wall processor, then it's actually in that space. It's just being sent out, and the LED wall processors isn't using it. So that's that. So then your viewport is just going to be whatever resolution, you know what I mean? You could do multiple viewports within your one window, which you can see if I bring up the one, this is the one for an LED wall. You can see here in the viewports that my fly wall, what this is the wall, the LED wall is the top half, almost the top half. And then at the end of it is a float away panel that's being processed directly at the end of it. And then there's another panel that's being processed below it. So what we did was we made the LED wall and that one panel, but then split it into 2 viewports so that those 2 windows into your world live on that wall. But then we built a new wall for the area underneath of it so that we could render that screen at what it had to be rendered, which was ended up being a whole mess. And we had to, it was, yeah. So check the way it's being put out and then make sure that it's correct there. But back to the single setup. So yeah, so I mean, that's really it. So if you need to offset it, here's where you will offset it in relation to the top left corner of the window itself is where viewports are rendered. So this is why that's all at 0, because all the moving around is being done by the windows here and not by the viewports. So then I have my IMAX screen, I have my HD monitor, and then I have my projector. And then those are all being, you don't have to, if you're gonna just use this blueprint, I mean, I can't get into what all this stuff is doing, but then you have the buffers of those. So if you are like, we have tons of processing power, we're fine, jack this up to 1. 1 is the highest. And then this will determine on what you are trying to do. This is the static view of your in-camera frustum. So this is your in-camera frustum straight out of camera. This is the camera feed, not the plane that's being, so this is your camera feed. So you kind of want to like not have that on the screen because you don't want just the camera feed on the screen. So what you do here is you offset it by whatever the height of your first screen is. So then it's just taking it and then it's just moving it slightly off screen. And then you're like, okay, it's being rendered, but slightly off screen and only when that plane is coming in. But it needs to be rendered and it needs to be on each of your viewports and I mean, each of your windows because it needs to be able to put itself onto that plane. I keep mine around 2K. This is like kind of like a 2K. I think for larger LED wall setups, you got to remember whatever your camera sees, that's the resolution. So if you have like a 4K wall, you know what I mean? Unless you back up to the edges of the wall, you're never going to completely stretch out that 4K and need that extra resolution. But you got to watch out if you make it too small, it will, you know what I mean? If you make it 1080 and you make the thing as big as a 4K wall, you're stretching a 1080 image to a 4K wall, and it's not going to look as good as it can. But also depending upon how much processing your level takes. I have and then I'm not going to explain this stuff, the projection, in-camera projection, but this is basically just saying that it's going to be a projection from inside the camera, which is connected to the other stuff that's going on in the in-camera settings. And then I have a buffer, there's a buffer ratio on this as well. I have mine at 8 right now for testing. If I was actually filming, I would try and crank that up to 1. Sometimes I've noticed 1, you have a little bit of stuff going on. If things are too sharp in an image because it's just insane. But I would definitely keep it as high as possible as long as you're not getting any issues. But you can up this to 4K or you can turn it down to 1080 if you're just messing around on a TV or something. And then I wouldn't even worry about all this stuff. Here, you can just leave it. This is part of how nDisplay runs when it is on its own and used for a slightly different purpose than what we're doing here. So then you have your input information. So what you're going to do here is now we're about to get into the next part so that we can get into this information is you can just leave these for now, but whatever you would like to do, I'll set up with the controller. So in the file that you got, you should have the VPRN Okay, I may have included the wrong one in this. I will look into that and then fix it and make sure that this one is included. But what you have to do is you run this and it will receive your VR signal and then spit out an address here. You're going to take that address. This is my controller. If you have different things, we'll have different addresses. And I have yet to have this change, even though I still check it all the time, because you never know when things could go, you know, you could mess something up. So it's always good to remember where everything is and what is talking to what. So you're going to replace this with that. Mine's exactly the same thing. So I didn't even need to do that. Make sure that is not there. And then make sure that you replace your IP address, which you can go to print command and type in IP IP config, and then it will pop up. And then you take your address. Yeah, and then in this input, so I'm just going to show you how to set up the controller. The tracker is the same exact thing. You just take the information, you make sure that you change out your IP address, and you make sure that you change out the tracker information. And if you want to change this, you are more than welcome to, and I'll show you how it connects to the other system. And then these buttons, same thing. If you want the buttons to work with your Vive controller buttons, you will need to put your controller in here. So Control V, and then there, and then change out the IP address. And then you can just leave this. This is the like port number. This is to tell it where to go, where the VRPN lives, and like how to get to it. It's its phone number or its area code.
That's why.
Yes. So once we get into actually firing this whole system up, we can go over it right now.
Like blueprint, if the blueprint had that reference saying banana, for instance.
Yes. If I want to name this banana, and then I changed the input to banana,
yeah.
You know, it would work.
Yeah, and then it would have, cool. Yeah. That's why the nomenclature is there.
Yeah. But I tried to make it as easy as possible so that, you know what I mean? You don't have to change that stuff if you want to do just a basic setup. You know, if you want to get it rock and rolling, you don't have to put in your own information. You just have to put in the ID. So I'll show you how, so the way to get that ID is to run the print, the OpenVR, VRPN OpenVR that I'll send you that will come with this, or there will be a link in the description of this video. So we will leave that running. That is now intercepting our Vive information and putting an ID on it. And then, so once we've gone through here, let me just exit out of. I'm just gonna not save changes because I tend to mess things up a lot by going through and explaining them and pasting things into it. So yet again, we are just going to run one screen so we can get rid of these. You will need to do this because the config will probably not have this done in it. So now that you got your config all set up and you're like, okay, I got all my information. I got my VPRN running. Vive is running. It's got my base stations. I see everything. Now we have to get into our we're going to have to get into Unreal Engine. We're going to have to go into our warp surfaces blueprint, and we're going to tell it where these monitors are. Actually, first I'm going to show you this. So now we're going to come back to this. So remember, at event play, this is probably going to be the most complicated thing that you have to set up here, is this aspect of it. All the rest is just getting things to run. I generally just leave this like this, because this is my iMac mesh, this is my HD TV mesh, this is my projector mesh. And then here are the viewports, you know what I mean? You could change the ID to banana. And then if you come over here and you want this one to be banana, it just lines up with it. That's gonna automatically send out to that. It always needs a root, the default scene root, and then it needs your mesh, and it needs to know what protocol it's doing, like what type of projection to the mesh it's doing. So right now, this is set up for 3 monitors. We're gonna run this just on my iMac screen. So if you wanted to run it on just 2 screens, you can do this and change your stuff here. If you wanted, you're like, okay, I'm doing testing, I don't wanna use this screen now, but I don't wanna change the config too much. You don't want to change things around too much. You could just render to your 3rd screen, and then that will come in on viewport 3. But then you would need to make sure that whatever node you have here is lining up with the window. So what I often do is, if I want to run my 3rd screen and not have to change anything, I just do this, and then I change the window name to 1. So now it's taking the signal from this first node, because you can't really switch these around. You know, you can't fire one that's not the master and not fire the master. Now, what all you need to do is, that's the only thing you'd have to change. So now you can render viewport 3 in window, what was window 3, to the projector screen. So I'll actually set that up. I'll actually set it up so that it goes to the projector screen. I hope that's not too confusing, but so now what I'm going to send it to the 3rd viewport, which is my projector. Now I'm actually just going to set up my projector, and that's it. So what you want to do here, so now this is the only way, I know there's got to be other ways to do this. This is the only way I know how to do this. So I'm just going to run through it real quick. Bring in a geometry box, and then set the X value to 1. And then these are this box's values in centimeters. So what you want to do is, you now want to go measure the size of your screen and see how big it is. So mine is about 64 inches wide.
You want to measure the screen in centimeters.
Oh, in centimeters, yeah, my bad.
Yeah.
So it is, good job, 160 wide by 90. So 160 by 90. So you can take that and go 160 by 90. So that's the size of my projection screen. You guys are gonna laugh when you realize what I'm gonna do with this, but it's the only way I know how to do this. So if you go down to where you just entered that in and you click this little drop down, I'll do that again because it's a tricky thing sometimes. And go to create static mesh. I would name this just like, if you're moving, if it's gonna stay, you know, and you just wanna keep it, I'll just name it projector screen. And then, you know what I mean? You could put the date. My projector is always changing size. Right now I have it small just so that it fits in my, my other computer's view so that you guys can see it on the screen. So I'm gonna create that. That's gonna be in my content now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to just delete that. I'm going to go into warps, surfaces, and then make this smaller. And I'm just going to drag that projector screen into there. And then what I normally like to do is I'll just set whatever screen I'm rechanging the size to 0, 0, 0, so that it perfectly lines up with the mesh, because we're going to just be changing the mesh size to match this thing that we created. Because it's a little hard. I'm not sure how to get the settings right for nDisplay to be able to use this actual mesh. So as of right now, I just size it, and then the easiest way to get some real like world perspective and get its size correct is to just bring in something that you know is the exact size of what you want, and then just get it super close. You can generate a mesh. If you're using an LED wall, you're going to want to build a mesh. You can use programs like Cinema 4D or other programs. I can try and put a link to the settings that you would need. I know that you need to flip the UVs and do a couple other things to get it to work with nDisplay. So right now, for this simple setup, we're just going to do this. And then I'm just going to delete projector screen now. So we should be, that should be the size of our screen. But now it lives at 0. We have to fix that. Got to get you back up there with your other buddies. So in the files that you'll download, there's going to be the First VP Toolkit Volume 1, version 1 doc. So what you're going to do here is you're going to need to find the address of your print command, whatever's printing out that VRPN, which is this guy. So you're going to want to find where that is and then put that address there. So, I mean, I could actually just take this, and you're going to want to put it inside the quotations. Oh, no, don't run. Let's just put it up and then. All right. So this is it right here. This is what I did have the file correct. Hey, how do you like that? So you just have to, you should just double click this and it will run this VPRN. And if it has any, but you need, I think the config file for it, this one. You will not be affecting this though. But so you will want to place your address of wherever that lives. So I recommend when you download this, what I've been doing is I just go to Unreal Engine documents and then I would paste it here so that you have everything here. And then you have to watch out because config files, the config that you'll be using cannot be anywhere that in the path has spaces. So Unreal Engine projects, you cannot put the config in there. So I just put the config in documents. So it just lives here. And then you will get your VRPN address that is popping out here again, or still, if you still have it copied. And you will put that right in here. And then you want to copy this whole thing. Open up your print command. I recommend changing the size of the print command so that you can see it at a further distance. Because when you're 12 feet away from your one monitor and it's printing out and you're trying to get the relation to your other monitor, I guess you could actually just move it to that monitor. Never thought about that until now. But I have it huge. Okay, so that didn't work. Do one that's actually running. So it's probably this. So you can see it. You copied this. Hopefully this will work. Put that there. Make sure there's a slash in it. And let's see if this works. Yes, there we go. All right, so now once you get that running, what I like to do is, would you be able to write this down, just write this down for me?
Yeah.
So what I'm gonna do is, I'm just gonna hold the tracker. You know, I recommend for the first couple times you set this up, move these numbers. So what this is your X, your, oh, hold on. So it's your X, your Y, no, your X, your Z, and your Y, I believe. I'll double check in a second, but so, yeah. And then this is, you can see it. So if I move it in my X value, okay, so it's Y, Z, X. It's 231, 231. So you can see this is moving in X space. I recommend that you get comfortable with this so you kind of know what you're looking at. This is moving in Y space. You can see the first one going all crazy. That's Y, and then this is moving in height, which is Z. So my 0 point is probably somewhere around here. My other tracker is blocked, and it's probably underneath my bed. So I'm not gonna find 0. I recommend you find 0, get comfortable with it, realize where it is, where it was generated, maybe even like put something there or put a piece of tape so that you can refer back to it if you're calibrating your stage. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna real lazy, make sure that you're not blocking any of your trackers when you do this. And actually, if your trackers can't see your screen well, this can get a little weird sometimes. Like I've had calibration not be perfect doing this if my tracker could not see my screen, or both trackers. Okay, so can you write that down? I mean, you can measure, you probably want to know where the exact center of your screen is. That would determine how accurate this is.
That's 2.0. You're moving a little bit, so it's like 2.04.
It's fine, just the first 3 numbers.
Negative 204, 125, 0.62.
Good?
Yeah.
And then what you're gonna do is, you're gonna find the height of your actual floor. So put the tracker on the ground, and then you'll see most likely that where the actual floor is slightly off. So you can see it's 0.08 above the floor. Sometimes it will generate it underneath the floor. It's just because it has a little trouble deciding where your floor actually is. So now we're going to take that information and let's just be ballsy and close this for now. Yes, I want to save that. And then, so now we're going to go into our warp surfaces, and we have set our mesh to 0 and sized it to be whatever screen that we want to use now. So what you're going to do is now you're going to take your transform, and then, so what was the first number?
Negative 204.
So when it prints out, it's doing it in meters. So 1 is 1 meter, but in here you're using centimeters. So it's going to be, what was it, 204?
Yeah.
And then so it'll be 204 point something, or was it just 204?
2.04.
2.04. Okay, so yeah, so it's just 204. So you're doing 200 centimeters or 2 meters. And then the second number, was it negative, you said?
No, the 2 was negative. It was negative 2.04, and then the V is 1.25.
So the next number is 1.25.
Right.
Okay, so you got to remember that the numbers that it spit out are 3, 4. So we're going down the line right now. 3, 4, and then the last number, 2, 3, and then 1. So it was, what was it again? My apologies.
1.25. So that would be converted to 1.
Yeah, so that would be converted to that. And then in X space, what was the number?
0.62.
0.62. So it'll just be 62. And then I know that my screen is on the side of, what would it be? I don't know. I would just put 170. And then you make sure that that looks right. You know, you make sure that based on this will be your root. This is wherever 0 was. And you make sure that, you know, if the thing is like over here somewhere, something's wrong. You know, if it doesn't look like your stage, then it's not your stage. This is your virtual representation of your physical VR space. So your 0 point of your command, when you print out the command, when you put that at 0, that's where this lives. I also have a floor in here. This I use for a subtle like offset of how it moves the floor, because I want my real floor to match up with my virtual floor. So if it sets my real floor 7 millimeters or centimeters into the air, I want my virtual floor to also be that, so that the gap between my virtual floor and the beginning of my monitor or the bottom of the LED stage line up properly. Yeah, so I'm just running this monitor. You'll have to do the same process all the way through for all of these monitors. And then we'll want to go in here and make sure that we are set up so that we are firing off whatever viewport that we'd like to use. And then we need to make sure that that viewport is being represented here and then properly. So I like to follow the chain back, as I say. Be a slave to the process, follow the chain back. And so you say, okay, I'm going to viewport 3, that is my projector mesh, start at the mesh. And then go to, you say, okay, my viewport, and then you can follow the line back to here. Viewport 3, and it's this size. And then you got to make sure that, okay, the window that I'm running has viewport 3 in it, and it's the correct size. I've already set all that up. You'll have to put in this information wherever you want this to fire. And then, and of course you have to watch this video 100 times before you get it, because we all do. And then you got to make sure that whatever window you're firing in your node is the window that you're firing in your window, is the viewport that you're firing inside of the window, is the viewport that is the actual viewport. And then projection mesh. And that's that. Next, so what you want to do is, I will show you how to get to, I had to retrain myself how to do this. So you're going to go and get your nDisplay listener and launcher. That is in your, whatever your system hard drive is, program files, Epic Games, whatever version of UE that you're running, engine, and then it is in binaries, and then .NET, and then you're going to run the launcher, and then you're going to run the listener. You can just kind of minimize the listener. That just has to be running in the background. It's just listening for commands, and that's it. So to familiarize yourself with this, these are your projects that you have loaded into this launcher. You know what I mean? These are basically just paths. I'm going to show you how to actually add one. So this is the way you can run nDisplay in multiple ways. I don't mess with any of them because this way I found, you know what I mean, is the most reliable and works for what I want to do and is working what I'm going to show you, so that I know that your system is going to work as well. So you go to add project in editor game. Then you're going to have to tell it what editor you're using. So you're going to go similar to where it lived. You're going to go Epic Games, UE, Engine, binaries, and then you're going to go to, instead of going to .NET, you're going to go to Windows 64, and then you're going to tell it where the editor application is. It just needs to know what it's running it on. It's going to open your project, and it's going to open Unreal Engine all at the same time. So now it's going to ask you, it automatically pops up the next thing. It wants to know where your project file is. So you're going to go into your project file, and you're going to tell it where your project file is. That is set. You just got to, I've had a couple times, if you add a project, it doesn't automatically go to it. So you want to make sure that it's there. If you have any issues, sometimes I remove all my projects and go back. You can get a little crazy with a couple projects in there. So then you're going to want to add your config file. I just removed 2 config files because I don't want a ton of config files. It'll be easier for me to show you guys. So I go to documents, and my config lives here. And then now, I mean, technically, I think it should fire up. And Houston, we are go. So if that did not fire up, I will show you why. We're going to go through the template project here and make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be, because these things can get lost on you sometimes. So we'll go through the checklist here. The main thing you want to set up, and that you need to have awareness of, and that when you bring this into other things, these will reset themselves sometimes. I would like to, you know what I mean, I might go in here and change the defaults so that they just automatically link up to what is already in there, so that it's even more like dummy proof. So you want to go into your in-camera settings in your default pawn here, and you want to make sure that this is connected to whatever camera that you're using. This is one, you know what I mean, these drop-down menus are the main things that, this is your in-camera viewport ID. I wouldn't touch this unless you start getting into more complicated aspects, so don't even touch it. Your LED stage origin view here, this is what determines where the point of view of your outside of your camera's view is. So you saw when we fire it up, you have a perspective of what is going on before my camera goes in front of it and puts its perspective on top of it. This is where that is rendered from. So this is where you would want to put, you'd want this to be kind of accurate to your talent. Oh, I should have, in version 2, there will be a way to put this to a tracker. I'll rig that up for whenever I release next. I can't add all the goodies in at once, so that you'll be able to just connect this to a tracker. And then your warp monitor, of course, you're going to want to go through and then you know what I mean? This should all be, should be fine and dandy. So then if your camera is not tracking, you'll want to go to the tracker and make sure that the ID matches up with your ID here on your tracker, and then make sure that your VPRN is correct. Make sure that you didn't delete this comma. Make sure that you didn't delete this at, and make sure that your IP address is correct and hasn't changed, because you didn't make a static IP address, no matter how many times I said to stop and go do that. So that should give you the basic setup.